Mud squelched under Nessa Silverleaf's boots as she moved through the field hospital, canvas tents hastily erected behind Allied lines. Amid the chaos, an eerie elven organization prevailed. Her silver robes were stained with mud, blood, and the yellowish residue of orcish chemical weapons. Artillery boomed, a constant reminder of the front lines a mile off. Her long life hadn't prepared her for this war's evolving horror. "Healer Silverleaf," called a young elven apprentice. "The triage station has 3 more elven soldiers from the eastern flank." Nessa nodded curtly. "Take them to Section 2. I'll attend to them shortly." The apprentice hesitated. "There are also 5 humans, from their forward scout division." "Section 4, Nessa replied, without looking up from the wounds she was dressing. "Standard care protocols." Everyone understood. Elven casualties received full magical healing. Humans, mundane treatment. Healing magic was too precious to waste on their fleeting lives. The unspoken reality hung heavy. A human medic passing by caught her eye, his face tight with resentment. Nessa ignored him. This war demanded difficult choices, and sentiment had no place in triage. As she finished with her patient, an elven archer with a shrapnel wound that would leave no scar thanks to her ministrations, she heard a commotion at the entrance. 4 human stretcher-bearers struggled through the mud, carrying a 5th. Blood soaked through the crude battlefield bandages wrapped around the man's shoulder. His arm hung at an unnatural angle, nearly severed. "Healer!" one of the stretcher-bearers called out, his voice cracking. "Please! He's bleeding out!" Nessa approached, keeping her face impassive as she assessed the wound. Artillery shrapnel, most likely. The human's face was ashen, lips already taking on a bluish tinge. The pool of blood beneath the stretcher widened, despite the pressure bandages. "Section 4, she said, gesturing toward the far corner of the hospital, where the humans were treated. "He won't make it to Section 4, one of the bearers protested. "Look at him!" Nessa glanced at the wounded man more carefully. Young for a human, perhaps in his late 20s. Dark hair matted with mud and blood. His eyes were closed, breath coming in shallow gasps. She placed 2 fingers against his neck, feeling the rapid, thready pulse. "Take him to the transition area," she said quietly. The stretcher-bearers' faces fell. They knew what that meant. The space set aside for those beyond saving, where death rites were performed. As they carried him away, an elven healer named Theolin approached, shaking his head. "Another one?" he asked, his tone almost bored. "Yes," Nessa replied. "Artillery casualty. Humans break so easily in these conditions." Theolin nodded. "Their fragility is remarkable." "I'll prepare the death rites," Nessa said, gathering her supplies. Human bodies required different rituals. Their spirits didn't linger as elven ones did. The transition needed to be managed properly, even for such short-lived beings. In the quiet transition area, Nessa prepared for human death rites. The wounded man's breathing was labored. She unwrapped his bandages to assess the damage. The arm was nearly detached, hanging by a few tendons and sinews. The wound gaped, exposing splintered bone and torn muscle. Yet, something caught her attention. The bleeding had slowed more than it should have naturally. Frowning, Nessa leaned closer, using her healer's magical sight. She caught her breath. Tissue was knitting together at a microscopic level, far faster than any human, rivaling elven healing. She glanced around to ensure no one was watching, then placed her hand over the wound, whispering a minor healing spell, just enough to stabilize, not enough to fully heal. A faint blue glow emanated from her palm, sinking into the torn flesh. "What are you doing?" Theolin asked from behind her. Nessa withdrew her hand quickly. "Easing his passing," she replied without turning. "It's unnecessary for them to suffer, regardless of our resource limitations." Thielen made a non-committal sound. Don't waste too much energy. We have 3 more Elven archers coming in with burn wounds. I won't be long, she assured him, and then he departed. Alone again, Nessa studied him. His cellular structure was unique. She risked another small spell. His body amplified it. Fascinating. She made a decision then that went against 2 centuries of medical training and Elven protocol. She fully stabilized the wound, though deliberately left it looking grave to outside eyes. Then, she wrapped it in fresh bandages and wrote in her log that the human was in transition care, expected to expire before morning. Overnight, she checked on him repeatedly, astonished. Aided by her minimal magic, his body healed at an unprecedented rate. By midnight, major vessels had resealed. During her 4th visit, as she was examining the wound with magical sight, his eyes snapped open. Nessa jerked back, startled. The human's gaze was clear and direct, not the confused stare of someone emerging from shock. "You're not human," he said, his voice raspy but stronger than it should have been. "No," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. "I'm an Elven healer. You're in an allied field hospital." He attempted to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his injury. "I'm supposed to be dead, aren't I? That's what they were saying when they brought me in." "Lie still," she commanded. "And yes, by all normal expectations, you should be dead or dying. Your wound was catastrophic." The human's cracked lips formed a lopsided smile. "Wouldn't be the first time I've disappointed the Grim Reaper. We've got a standing date, but I keep standing him up." Nessa blinked, taken aback by the irreverence. Elves approach death with solemnity and ritual, not jokes. "What's your name, human?" she asked. Darren Montague, Scout Division." He looked down at his bandaged shoulder. How bad is it?" "Your arm was nearly severed at the shoulder. The bone was shattered, major arteries torn, tendons and muscles mangled." He whistled softly. "Yet, here I am, chatting away. Either you're the best healer in the Allied forces, or I'm already dead, and this is some strange afterlife." "Neither," Nessa said, studying him intently. "I provided minimal intervention. Your body is healing itself at a rate I've never observed in a human before." "Ah," Darren said, not seeming particularly surprised. "That happens." "That happens?" Nessa repeated incredulously. "Always been a quick healer. Broke my leg as a kid. Was walking in weeks, not months." He attempted to shrug, then groaned at the pain. "Not usually this dramatic, though. Must have been whenever you did." Nessa glanced around to ensure they were still alone, then lowered her voice. "I've provided you with only basic stabilization magic, the minimum required for the death ritual. Your body appears to be amplifying its effects exponentially." Darren's expression grew serious. "You're not supposed to use magic on humans, are you? I've seen how it works in these hospitals." Nessa didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached for a water flask and held it to his lips. "Drink. You've lost a significant amount of blood." He drank deeply, then asked, "Why help me? Based on the condition of this part of the tent, and the fact that no one else is around? I'm guessing this is where you put lost causes." "You present an anomaly that warrants investigation," she said stiffly. Darren gave her another lopsided smile. "Your bedside manner could use some work, but I'll take scientific curiosity over being left to die." Despite herself, Nessa felt a twinge of something. Not quite amusement, perhaps respect for his resilience. "Rest," she instructed. "I've documented you as terminal. It will buy us time to understand this phenomenon, but if anyone besides me checks on you, appear as weak as possible." "Play dead?"
I can do that. Had plenty of practice recently. His eyes were already drooping, the brief conversation having drained his limited energy. As she rose to leave, he murmured, "Hey, Elven healer. Got a name?" She hesitated, then answered, "Nessa Silverleaf." "Thanks for not letting me die, Nessa Silverleaf," he whispered, before sleep claimed him. Watching him, Nessa felt troubled. Breaking protocol was illogical, even treasonous, yet his healing mystery captivated her. A week later, Darren's condition was remarkably improved under Nessa's secret care. His arm, though still damaged, was healing, bones knitting, blood flow restored, defying the usual outcome of such human injuries. She had relocated him to a storage alcove connected to her personal healing chamber, documenting his death and body removal in the official logs. Few questioned the word of Nessa Silverleaf, especially regarding human casualties. Through careful observation and controlled magical experiments, she documented his extraordinary healing rate. His cellular regeneration occurred at nearly 5 times normal human speed, when augmented by even the smallest amount of healing magic, a response more typical of Elven biology. On the morning of the 8th day, as Nessa changed his bandages and applied a mild regeneration balm, alarm horns sounded through the camp. "What's happening?" Darren asked, now able to sit up and feed himself. "I don't know," Nessa replied, moving to the tent entrance. Outside, Elven soldiers ran toward the command area, their faces tense. She stepped out, catching the arm of a passing healer apprentice. "Farendil, what's going on?" The young elf's eyes were wide with fear. New orcish offensive along the eastern front. They've deployed some kind of new gas weapon. The first casualties are arriving now." Gas? Nessa's stomach clenched. Chemical warfare was the orcs' newest tactic, one that had proven devastatingly effective. "I must go," she told Darren, hastily finishing the bandage. "Stay here and make no sound. I'll return when I can." The main hospital was a vision of elven halls. Stretchers poured in, soldiers with blistered skin, foaming mouths. The air reeked. Healers rushed, grim-faced, as their spells offered minimal relief. "Healer Silverleaf!" called Lord Thalon, the head of the medical council. "We need your expertise with the respiratory cases." For hours, Nessa worked without rest, channeling healing magic into burned lungs and damaged eyes. But something was different about this attack. The traditional healing spells that should have reversed chemical damage seemed to barely slow the progression of symptoms. "It's not working," muttered Farendil, as another patient began to convulse despite treatment. "This gas is different from the previous ones." Nessa nodded grimly. "It seems to be specifically targeting our healing. Notice how the magic disperses upon contact?" In the far corner, human medics worked with their own casualties, using water to wash away residue and mechanical breathing devices to support failing lungs. Curiously, their success rate appeared higher despite their less advanced methods. By late afternoon, the situation had become clear and dire. The new gas weapon affected elves far more severely than humans. While human casualties stabilized with basic care, elven patients continued to deteriorate, despite the most powerful healing magic. As twilight approached, Nessa finally took a moment to rest, stepping outside the main tent for air, uncontaminated by the gas residue. Her limbs felt leaden, her magical reserves depleted after hours of intensive healing work. "You look like hell," came a voice from behind her. She spun around to find Darren standing there, his injured arm supported by a makeshift sling fashioned from a torn shirt. "What are you doing? You should be hidden," she hissed, glancing around to ensure no one saw him. "Heard the commotion," he replied. "Figured you could use help, even with one arm at half capacity." "Absurd, you're still injured." "I can carry supplies, change bandages. I was a doctor's assistant. You're short-handed. 20 healers are down. Nessa wanted to argue, but the reality of their situation made his point for him. Over 100 Elven soldiers lay suffering, with too few healers still standing to treat them all. Fine, she relented, but you're a deceased human scout who is secretly kept alive through forbidden magical experimentation. If anyone asks, you're a volunteer. From the Human Medical Corps. Got it, I'm nobody. He gave her a mock salute with his good arm. Just point me where you need me. Despite her misgivings, Nessa brought Darren to a section of the hospital where less critical patients were being monitored. Basic supportive care only, she instructed. Change bandages, provide water, alert a healer if anyone worsens. Surprisingly, Darren was skilled and efficient, his calm, bedside manner a contrast to hers. He treated all patients with respectful attention. As the night wore on, new information arrived with each wave of casualties. The Orcish attack had pushed the Allied front back nearly 2 miles. The gas had been deployed across a 5-mile section of trenches, and preliminary reports suggested the Elven warriors had been disproportionately affected. Near midnight, an Elven commander arrived, his armor still bearing traces of the battlefield. He conferred with Lord Thalen in hushed tones, but their voices carried to where Nessa worked nearby. "We cannot maintain the line," the commander said. "Our warriors fall at thrice the human rate. The gas uses our magic against us, targeting Elven physiology." "A tactical withdrawal?" Thalen asked reluctantly. "Abandon the humans?" "Our first duty is to our own," Thalen stated. "We must preserve our forces." The conversation left Nessa troubled. While she understood the pragmatic reasoning, something about the situation nagged at her. The differential impact between Elven and human casualties seemed too significant to be coincidental. Later, as the influx of new patients finally slowed, she found Darren sitting outside, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes alert. "You've been helpful," she admitted, sitting beside him. "Though, you should rest. Your body is still healing." "Says the healer who hasn't stopped for 12 hours straight," he replied. "I've been watching the patterns in the casualties. Have you noticed the humans exposed to the gas recover within days, while the elves keep deteriorating?" "Yes," Nessa said, surprised by his observation. "I've been trying to understand the mechanism." "I have a theory," Darren said, lowering his voice. "It reminds me of something I saw during an epidemic in my hometown. There was a disease that affected children much worse than adults because their bodies had built immunity. Whatever this gas does, humans seem to have some natural resistance that elves don't." The comment triggered something in Nessa's mind, a connection to what she'd observed in Darren's own healing. "Come with me," she said abruptly, standing. In her private healing chamber, Nessa took a small sample of blood from Darren's uninjured arm, placing it on a crystal plate used for magical analysis. "What are you doing?" he asked, watching as she passed her hands over the sample, whispering words in the ancient Elven tongue. "Testing a theory of my own," she replied, her focus on the blood that now glowed with a faint golden light under her magical examination. "Your body heals differently from any human I've ever treated. I believe it might be connected to why humans resist this gas better than elves." The analysis revealed exactly what she'd suspected, but hadn't fully formulated until now. Human cells, particularly Darren's, showed an aggressive natural regeneration response, far less elegant than Elven healing, but remarkably effective in its brute force approach. "Fascinating," she murmured. "Your cells don't channel magic as ours do. They combat damage directly, rebuilding themselves through purely physical means." "Is that good or bad?" Darren asked. "Neither," Simply different. Nessa sat back, her mind racing. Elven cells use magic for longevity and healing. Humans lacking this developed rapid physical regeneration. And this gas targets the magical aspect of elven healing? Precisely. It's attacking us at the cellular level, disrupting the magical longevity mechanisms that every elf possesses. She looked at him with new interest. And you, Darren Montague, appear to have an unusually strong version of the human regenerative response. He shrugged his good shoulder. Lucky me. Indeed. Nessa's mind was already formulating a new approach. I need to bring this information to the medical council immediately. It could change our entire treatment protocol. But when she presented her findings to Lord Thalen and the other senior healers the next morning, the response was not what she'd hoped for. You suggest that human physiology is superior to Elven in this regard? Thalen asked, his tone icy. Not superior, Nessa corrected carefully. Different. Evolved along a different path to achieve similar ends. Elves developed magical longevity, humans developed accelerated physical healing. Each has advantages under different circumstances. And your evidence for this theory? Nessa hesitated. She couldn't reveal her experimentation with Darren without admitting to breaking numerous protocols. Observational data from the casualties, she said instead. Humans recover from the gas exposure at rates that suggest an entirely different healing mechanism. Thalen dismissed it. Coincidence. Or the orcs targeted our biology. They fear our magic. But if I'm right, Nessa pressed, we could develop a treatment from human cellular response. We don't base Elven protocols on human biology, another snapped. Our methods have served for millennia. Yet they fail now, Nessa countered. Enough! Thalen cut in. Continue with established methods. Experiment on strengthening magical protections. Not this. Dismissed and seething, Nessa returned to her quarters to find Darren changing his own bandages. They didn't go for it? He guessed, reading her expression. Elven pride, she said bitterly. They cannot accept that in this one area, human biology might have an advantage. So, what now? Nessa paced the small space, her mind racing. We continue on our own. If I can prove the theory with concrete results, they'll have to listen. How do we do that? She stopped, fixing him with an intense gaze. I need more of your blood. A significant amount this time. Taking blood from a guy who nearly bled out a week ago? Bold medical strategy, he quipped, but was already rolling up his sleeve. How much do you need? As much as you can safely give. She began gathering equipment. I want to test whether components in human blood can counteract the effects of the gas on elven tissue. They worked in secret. Nessa took samples from Darren and human volunteers, vaguely explaining her research. She experimented, combining human blood components with affected elven tissue. The results were promising but inconsistent. Something in human blood temporarily halted the progression of the cellular damage, but didn't reverse it entirely. We're missing something, Nessa muttered, after another partially successful test. 4 days had passed since she'd presented her theory to the council, and the situation at the front had deteriorated further. The Elven forces had withdrawn from 2 more sections, leaving human troops exposed and suffering heavy casualties. Maybe we need a live test subject, Darren suggested. He'd become an essential part of her work, his pre-war medical knowledge complementing her magical expertise in unexpected ways. Too dangerous, Nessa replied. The council would need to approve human blood products being used on elven patients, even experimentally. Who said anything about asking permission? Darren's eyes held a challenge. What about using it on someone who volunteers, knowing the risks? Nessa stared at him. Are you suggesting... You, he said simply. You're the one who believes in this theory the most. And you've been exposed to trace amounts of the gas for days while treating patients. I've seen you coughing when you think no one's looking. She couldn't deny it. The persistent tickle in her lungs, the occasional difficulty breathing after prolonged exposure to patients. The early symptoms were there, though she'd been using her own healing magic to suppress them. It would require exposing myself to a concentrated sample of the gas, she said slowly, thinking through the implications. Deliberately inducing the condition. And then treating it with my blood, Darren finished. If it works for you, we have proof to take back to the council. The plan was reckless, unethical, potentially deadly, but their best chance. We'll do it tomorrow, Nessa decided. I'll need to prepare my space and gather the necessary materials. They set up a makeshift containment area in Nessa's private chamber, using sheets and magical barriers to prevent the gas from escaping. From the clothing of severely affected patients, Nessa carefully extracted residue of the gas, concentrating it into a small glass vial. This is a terrible idea, Darren said, tense. Even for me. Second thoughts? Nessa asked, attaching monitor crystals. About experimenting on the one who kept me alive? A few. His worry was plain. I'll be fine, she assured him, though she had no way of knowing if that was true. The dose is controlled, and we have the treatment ready. The treatment, a distilled serum derived from Darren's blood, enhanced with specific components they'd identified through their experiments, sat ready in a series of injection vials. Remember, she instructed, the first signs of severe reaction will be golden discoloration around my eyes and lips. At that point, administer the first injection. The second follows 2 hours later, regardless of response. Darren nodded, his face grim with determination. Maybe we should have tried this on someone who hasn't been keeping me alive. It needs to be me, Nessa said quietly. I'm the only one who fully understands both the theory and the treatment. With a final nod to Darren, she broke the seal on the vial and inhaled a small, carefully measured amount of the gas. The effect was almost immediate. Her lungs seized, and a burning sensation spread through her chest. She dropped to her knees, fighting to maintain consciousness as the room spun around her. Through watering eyes, she saw Darren rush to her side, his face a mask of concern. His mouth moved, but she couldn't hear his words over the roaring in her ears. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Darren reaching for the first injection vial, his hands steady despite the fear in his eyes. Nessa drifted, aware of cool cloths, stings of injections, Darren's voice. Fever racked her, her lungs felt like broken glass. At some point, the quality of the pain had changed. Instead of the sharp, magical disruption of the gas, she felt a different kind of burning, as if her body was fighting back with unfamiliar methods. When she finally regained full awareness, the first thing she saw was Darren asleep in a chair beside her pallet, his head lolling at an uncomfortable angle. Sunlight streamed through the small window, suggesting at least a full day had passed. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. The small movement as she tried to reach for water was enough to wake Darren, who started upright. "You're awake!" he said, relief washing over his features. He quickly poured water from a pitcher and held it to her lips. Slowly, the water soothed her raw throat, allowing her to whisper, "How long?" "Almost 2 days," he answered, setting the cup aside. "You had me worried there for a while. The first injection didn't seem to do too much, but after the second one, your fever broke." Nessa took internal stock of her condition. The burning in her lungs had subsided to a dull ache. She could breathe without the knife-like pain that had accompanied each breath when she first inhaled the gas. But something else felt different. Wrong, somehow. She reached for her magical healer's vision. Nothing. She tried again, focusing her will. Still nothing. "Darren," she said, her voice steadier now, but tight with alarm. "Something is wrong with my magic." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "The gas attacks the magical pathways in Elven cells. We knew that." "But the treatment was supposed to stop the progression, not..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "It did stop it," he said gently. "You're alive! Your body fought off the gas, using the human regenerative factors from my blood. But I think the damage to your magical systems might be permanent." The implications crashed over her like a wave. An Elven healer without magic was unheard of. Her entire identity, 2.5 centuries of purpose and meaning, threatened to crumble. "Try something simple," Darren suggested. "The most basic healing spell." Nessa concentrated, focusing on the small cut on her hand where the monitoring crystal had been attached. She whispered the words that should have sealed the tiny wound instantly. A faint, barely perceptible glow appeared, and the edges of the cut pulled together slightly, but it didn't heal completely as it should have. "It's still there," Darren said, watching closely. "Diminished, but not gone entirely." Nessa sank back against the pillows, overwhelmed. What use is an Elven healer with crippled magic? "The same use as a human doctor with one good arm," Darren replied firmly. "You adapt. You find new ways." She turned away, distress piercing her. For an elf whose identity was magical healing, the loss was core deep. "The treatment worked," Darren continued, his voice softening. "It saved your life, and it could save others. Isn't that worth something?" Slowly, Nessa turned back to him. "Yes," she admitted. "If we can replicate the results, refine the treatment, it could change the course of this front." "Then let's focus on that for now," he said, squeezing her hand briefly. "One problem at a time." Over the next several days, as Nessa regained her strength, they refined the treatment protocol. Her condition provided valuable data. They could observe exactly how human regenerative factors interacted with Elven physiology, where the strengths and limitations lay. Her diminished magic had an unexpected benefit. She could handle infected tissue samples harmful to fully magical elves, making her a unique bridge for their research. As she worked alongside Darren, she began to appreciate his human medical knowledge in a new light. Without her full magical abilities to rely on, she found herself learning from him. The precise placement of stitches to minimize scarring, how to set bones using traction rather than magical alignment, the careful monitoring of pulse and breathing to gauge a patient's condition. "You know," Darren said one evening, as they documented their latest results, "where I trained, there was this old doctor. Lost his right hand in an accident years before. Best surgeon in the region, even with just his left. Said losing the hand made him a better doctor. Forced him to think differently, be more careful, more precise." Nessa understood the point he was trying to make. "You're suggesting my condition might not be entirely a loss." "I'm suggesting that maybe there's value in both approaches, magical and non-magical. Each has strengths the other doesn't." He looked directly at her. "Just like humans and elves." The parallel wasn't lost on her. For the first time, she truly considered whether the Elven dismissal of human medical techniques might have cost them valuable knowledge, just as human distrust of magic limited their healing capabilities. With a new treatment protocol developed and tested, they faced their next challenge, convincing the medical council to implement it. Nessa was officially on medical leave, Her condition reported as standard gas exposure, her diminished magical abilities a closely guarded secret. They prepared their findings meticulously, knowing the Council's resistance to human-derived treatments would be substantial. But before they could request a hearing, events overtook them. A runner arrived at Nessa's quarters, his face grave. "Healer Silverleaf, your presence is requested immediately. The Eastern Battalion was hit with a massive gas attack. Over 300 Elven casualties." In the main hospital, chaos reigned. Every available space was filled with gasping, convulsing Elven soldiers. The existing treatments barely kept them alive, much less healed them. The few remaining Elven healers worked frantically, their faces showing the strain of channeling constant healing magic with minimal effect. Lord Thalen stood in the center of the mayhem, attempting to maintain order. When he saw Nessa, relief briefly flickered across his features. "Silverleaf, we need every healer, even those recovering. Can you assist?" Nessa straightened her shoulders. "I can do more than assist, my lord. I can offer a treatment that works." She explained her protocol rapidly, Darren at her side providing support data. Thalen's expression shifted from desperate hope to suspicion as he realized what she was proposing. "A treatment derived from human blood? Untested and unapproved?" "Tested on myself," Nessa replied steadily, "after I deliberately exposed myself to a concentrated sample of the gas." Shock rippled across Thalen's face. "You did what?" "What was necessary," she said simply. "And it worked. Not without cost." She hesitated, then forced herself to continue. "My magical abilities are significantly diminished, but I survived exposure that would have killed any elf without treatment." Thalen looked from her to Darren, taking in their determined expressions and the detailed treatment protocols they presented. Around them, more casualties arrived. An Elven captain approached, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Lord Thalen, we've lost the Eastern Ridge. The human battalion there was overrun when our forces could no longer hold the line." The weight of the situation hung heavy in the air. Pride and tradition balanced against survival. "Implement the treatment," Thalen finally ordered, his voice strained. "Begin with the most critical cases." For 18 grueling hours, Nessa and Darren trained a combined Elven-human team. Human blood, processed by their protocol, was administered to gasping elves. By dawn the next day, the results were undeniable. Nearly 70% of the treated elves showed significant improvement. The remainder stabilized, no longer deteriorating. Not a single new death had occurred among the treated. Thalen found Nessa as she slumped exhausted against a tent pole, watching the rising sun with bloodshot eyes. "Your treatment works," he acknowledged, his own fatigue evident. "The Council has approved emergency use for all affected casualties." "Thank you," Nessa said simply. "Don't thank me yet," Thalen replied. "We've halted the deterioration of our forces, but the strategic situation remains dire. The orcs continue to produce this gas weapon, and our supply of human blood for the treatment is limited." "We need to find the source," Darren said, joining them. "Cut it off at the production point." Thalen nodded reluctantly. "Our scouts have identified several possible locations behind enemy lines where the weapon may be manufactured. We need to confirm which one is the primary facility and destroy it." "I'll go," Darren offered immediately. "No!" The word burst from Nessa before she could stop it, surprising all of them with its vehemence. "I'm a scout," Darren said gently. "It's my job, and I'm human, less affected by these trace gas exposures if I run into them." "He's right," Thalen agreed. "A human scout would have the best chance of success." "He's still recovering from a nearly severed arm," Nessa protested. Darren flexed his injured arm, now mostly healed, though still weaker than his other. "Good enough for scouting. I won't be wrestling any orcs." The mission leaves at dusk, Thalen said. A small team, 3 human scouts and 2 elven rangers who've shown resistance to the gas. Their objective is reconnaissance only. Identify the facility, return with its exact location and defenses.
I'll be fine,
Darren assured Nessa when Thalen had left. This matters, Nessa. But unless we stop the gas production, we're just treating symptoms. She knew he was right, but something inside her rebelled at the thought of him risking his life again. When had this human become so important? His survival was more than scientific curiosity. Looking at him, his presence felt essential. I need to check your arm before you leave, she said, falling back on professional detachment to mask her turmoil. And prepare some healing supplies. For your pack. As dusk approached, they stood at the edge of the camp, where the scouting party was assembling. Nessa had provided Darren with specialized bandages, infused with healing herbs, emergency treatment vials, and a small crystal that would help navigate in the dark. Remember, the crystal glows warmer as you faced east, she instructed, though she had already explained it twice before. If you get disoriented... Nessa! Darren interrupted gently, taking her hands in his. I've got this. You prepared me as well as anyone could be prepared. She nodded, swallowing the unfamiliar knot in her throat. 2.5 centuries of life, and she'd never felt this particular emotion before. This terrible, wonderful ache. Be careful, she managed to say. Instead of responding with his usual quip or reassurance, Darren surprised her. He leaned forward and kissed her, right there at the edge of the camp where anyone might see. An elven healer and a human scout, breaking every unspoken rule about proper distance between their peoples. More surprising still was her response. She kissed him back without hesitation, her hands tightening on his, as something wild and unfamiliar surged through her. When they broke apart, his eyes held a mixture of wonder and certainty. I'll come back, he promised. We've got a lot more to figure out, you and I. Then he was gone, melting into the gathering darkness with the rest of the scouting party, leaving Nessa standing at the edge of the camp, touching her lips in astonishment at what had just transpired, and what it meant. The days that followed were the longest of Nessa's life. She threw herself into her work, implementing the treatment protocol across the hospital, training other healers in the combined elven-human techniques she and Darren had developed. Captain Mira Thornfield, the human liaison officer, sought her out on the 3rd day after Darren's departure. Healer Silverleaf, Captain Mira Thornfield said. Human Command appreciates your work. The combined protocol saved many. Thank you, Captain. Darren Montague also contributed significantly. Mira smiled. So I've heard. Quite significantly. Nessa flushed. The scout team? She asked. Mira sobered. Not yet. They're due to check in tomorrow. If not... That night, Nessa couldn't sleep. Her quarters felt empty without Darren. His laughter, questions, even his terrible jokes. When had her orderly life become so intertwined with this human's chaotic one? On the 5th day, the relay message arrived, brief, encoded, and missing 2 team members' signatures. The message indicated they had located what appeared to be the primary gas production facility, heavily guarded in a ravine, 30 miles behind enemy lines. The team was proceeding with closer reconnaissance. Darren's signature was among those on the message, bringing Nessa momentary relief. But as days 6 and 7 passed with no further word, her anxiety returned, amplified by reports of continued gas attacks along the front. On the morning of the 8th day, casualties arrived from a skirmish near where the scouting team had been operating. Among them were an elven ranger and a human scout, 2 members of Darren's team. Nessa rushed to their sides as they were brought in, her heart in her throat. The others? She asked without preamble. Darren Montague! The elven ranger, his face burned on one side from what looked like chemical exposure, shook his head wearily. Separated approaching the facility. Montague and Thistlewood continued. An orc patrol found us. We barely escaped. They could still be alive, Nessa pressed. Unlikely, the ranger conceded. More heavily guarded than expected. Shock troops with chemical weapons. Nessa treated to their wounds mechanically, her mind racing. No official rescue mission would be approved. The risk was too great. The strategic value of 2 scouts, too small compared against the potential losses. For the next 3 days, she functioned like an automaton, performing her duties with outward calm while inwardly calculating, planning. She gathered studies, supplies, maps, specialized protective gear developed for the gas. If Darren was alive, waiting for extraction or attempting to make his way back, every hour mattered. On the evening of the 11th day since the scouting party's departure, as Nessa finalized her plans to leave at dawn, unauthorized, alone, a commotion erupted at the camp perimeter. She hurried toward the sound, along with dozens of others drawn by the shouting. Through the gathering crowd, she caught a glimpse of a figure being supported by 2 soldiers, but moving under their own power. "Make way!" someone shouted. "A wounded scout coming through!" The crowd parted, and Nessa found herself face to face with Darren Montague. He looked terrible, gaunt, exhausted, with a fresh gash across his forehead and clothing singed and torn. But he was undeniably, miraculously alive. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, neither quite believing the sight before them. Then, Darren's cracked lips pulled into that familiar, lopsided smile. "Told you I'd come back," he rasped. Nessa moved forward, medical training warring with the impulse to throw her arms around him. Professional duty won, barely. "You need treatment," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "That head wound." "Later," Darren interrupted. He straightened, shaking off the supporting hands of the soldiers. "I need to report. The facility, we found it. Thistlewood didn't make it, but we got inside, got the plans, the layout, everything they need for a strike force." A crowd had gathered now, including Lord Thalen and several Elven commanders. Darren turned to address them directly. "The gas production can be stopped," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "The facility is built around an ancient magical wellspring. They're corrupting its energy to create the chemical reaction. Destroy the channeling apparatus, the production ends." The commanders exchanged glances, already calculating the strategic implications. Amid the excitement, Darren swayed slightly on his feet. Nessa stepped forward to steady him, her hand on his arm. "Report delivered," she said firmly to the assembled leaders. "This scout requires immediate medical attention." To her surprise, no one argued. Thalen even nodded approval as she led Darren away from the crowd toward the hospital. "Quite the dramatic entrance," she murmured as they walked, her arm supporting his waist, his leaning heavier on her than he probably intended. "Wanted to make an impression," he replied, grimacing as they navigated a rough patch of ground. "Didn't want you to think I'd stood you up after that goodbye." In the privacy of her healing chamber, Nessa finally allowed herself to embrace him properly, careful of his injuries, but unwilling to maintain professional distance for a moment longer. He returned to the embrace with surprising strength for someone who looked half dead on his feet. "I thought you were gone," she admitted. "I planned a solo rescue, at dawn." He stared. "You were coming after me, alone, through enemy territory?" "Don't be surprised. I've invested too much in keeping you alive to write it off." He laughed, then winced as the motion pulled at his injuries. "You really need to work on those romantic declarations, Nessa." As she began cleaning his wounds, her hands steady and gentle, she found herself smiling, despite the gravity of the past days. "I am 247 years old, Darren Montague. Romance has never been part of my experience." "Seriously?" He looked genuinely surprised. "In all those years, you never?" Elven relationships are typically long, formal affairs, she explained, applying a healing salve to the gash on his forehead. There's little room for spontaneity or passion. Centuries of life teach patience in all things. But she kissed me back, he said softly. That didn't feel patient or formal. Nessa's hand stilled. No, she agreed. It didn't. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then, a commotion outside broke the spell. Raised voices, the sound of running feet. "Healer Silverleaf!" called an apprentice from beyond the door. "You're needed! The command is assembling a strike force based on the scouts' information. They're requesting the gas treatment for all team members as a preventative measure." Reality intruded, as it always did in wartime. The tender moment would have to wait. "Rest," she instructed Darren, reaching for her medical bag. "I'll return when I can." But Darren caught her hand before she could leave. "When this is over," he said, his eyes intent on hers. "When the gas facility is destroyed and this front is stabilized, we should talk about what happens next." "Next?" Nessa repeated. "For us," he clarified. "I know elves take the long view of things and humans, well, we tend to rush, but this war has taught me life is too short to waste time. Even for elves, when you find someone who changes your world." The simplicity and directness of his words struck her. This human, with his brief span of years, understood something that elves with their centuries often forgot. The value of the present moment, the importance of seizing happiness when it appears. "Yes," she agreed, squeezing his hand briefly. "We should talk about that." The strike against the gas production facility succeeded 3 days later. Elite Elven and human forces, protected by the treatment Nessa and Darren had developed, penetrated deep behind enemy lines and destroyed the magical channeling apparatus, ending the orcs' ability to mass-produce the devastating weapon. When their secret weapon was neutralized, the orcish offensive faltered. The Allied forces regained lost ground, and the front stabilized. For the first time in months, the field hospital saw more recoveries than new casualties. Darren's actions had made him something of a hero, among both humans and elves. The scout, who'd penetrated the enemy's most guarded facility, returned with vital intelligence and changed the course of the war. Elves particularly noted his role in the treatment that saved hundreds of their own. 2 weeks after the successful strike, as the hospital began the process of relocating to a more permanent facility behind the newly secured lines, Darren found Nessa organizing medical supplies. "So," he said, leaning against a tent pole. "About that talk." Nessa set down the box she was inventorying. "Now?" "No time like the present," he replied with a smile. "Especially when you've nearly died a few times recently." She had to acknowledge the truth in that. "What did you have in mind?" Instead of answering directly, Darren took her hand and led her outside, away from the bustle of the hospital, to a small, quiet space beneath a cluster of trees. Late sun dappled the ground. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically serious. "About us. About what happens when the war ends." "A hopeful assumption that it will end," Nessa observed. "It will," he said with conviction. "Maybe not this month, or this year, but eventually. And then what? You go back to the elven healing temples, I return to whatever's left of my hometown?" The thought sent an unexpected pang through Nessa's chest. After everything they'd been through together, the idea of simply parting ways seemed unthinkable. "I don't know," she admitted. "My place in Elven society is complicated now." She flexed her hand, calling forth a small spark of healing magic, stronger than it had been immediately after her exposure to the gas, but still drastically reduced from her former abilities. "I'm neither fully magical healer, nor non-magical medic." You're both, Darren corrected. A bridge, like our protocol. His perspective continually surprised her. Where she saw limitation, he saw possibility. Where she saw division, he saw connection. The medical council has proposed establishing a new research division, she told him, focused on integrating elven and human healing techniques. They've asked me to lead it. That's perfect! Darren's face lit up. You'd be amazing at that! They've also suggested you might be a part of it, she added carefully, watching his reaction. As a human medical advisor. His expression softened. Working together? I'd like that. Then something shifted in his eyes, a decision being made. But I want more than that, Nessa. Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring, fashioned from what appeared to be polished wood and silver. Where I come from, he said, his voice steady but vulnerable. When you find someone you can't imagine living without, you don't wait around for centuries to see if the feeling fades. Nessa stared at the ring, then at him, momentarily speechless. I know it's fast by Elven standards, probably insane, but I'm certain. You've changed how I see everything, Nessa. Elves, healing, connection. He took a deep breath, then dropped to one knee before her. I don't have centuries to offer you, he said, holding up the ring. Just decades, if we're lucky, but they would be decades filled with discovery, growth, and partnership. Marry me, Nessa. Help me build something new, something that bridges our worlds just as we've bridged our healing traditions. Nessa looked down at him. This human, who had upended her carefully ordered existence, who had helped her find new purpose when her old one was damaged beyond repair. By Elven standards, his proposal was wildly premature, almost offensively hasty. Courtships among her people typically lasted years, sometimes decades, with careful consideration given to compatibility over centuries of shared life. The war, her diminished magic, working with Darren, it had all changed her. She saw value in human capability, their seizing of moments. Perhaps centuries made elves too cautious, postponing joy for planning. Around them, the late sunlight painted the world in gold. The sounds of the camp, of life continuing despite everything, created a gentle backdrop to this moment, suspended between two vastly different lifespans, two approaches to existence. Nessa reached down and took Darren's hand, drawing him back to his feet. She didn't take the ring, not yet, but she didn't refuse it either. In Elven culture, she said softly, a proposal would typically be followed by at least a year of formal courtship rituals before an answer would be expected. Darren's face fell slightly, though he tried to hide it. Right, of course. I didn't mean to rush. However, she continued, placing a finger against his lips to quiet him, I find myself increasingly appreciative of certain human customs. The ability to recognize value without centuries of contemplation. The courage to act on certainty when it presents itself. Hope rekindled in his eyes. Does that mean? Nessa smiled then, a full, unrestrained expression that felt foreign to her face but wonderfully right. It means I am willing to accept your proposal, Darren Montague. With one condition. Name it, he said immediately. That we build this bridge between our peoples together, not just in healing techniques, but in how we live, how we love. That we take the best of both approaches, elven and human, deliberation and spontaneity, magical and physical. Darren's answering smile was radiant. I can work with that. He held up the ring again, questioningly. This time, Nessa extended her hand, allowing him to slide the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the polished wood warm against her skin, the silver catching the dying sunlight. "I should warn you," she said, examining it, "that Elven marriage ceremonies traditionally last at least a month." "A month-long wedding? Fine, as long as no centuries of engagement." He pulled her close. "Human weddings in my town end with the village drunk." "Cultural integration," Nessa said dryly. As the sun sank lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the war-torn landscape, they stood together, elf and human, magical and mundane, ancient and young, a living bridge between two worlds that had always been more similar than either cared to admit. The war would continue. Challenges would arise. But in this moment, something new had begun. Something that might, in its own small way, help heal divisions far deeper than physical wounds. For the long-lived elf and the death-defying human, their love proved that even in dark times, life renews, adapts, and grows in unimaginable ways.